Pentagon's E-ring is a fortress of power, walked by the world's most dangerous men. But for years, the most lethal man in the building wasn't a general or a politician. He was the old limping janitor everyone mocked until the highest-ranking officer in the military stopped dead in his tracks and saluted him. The squeak of Arthur Pendleton's mop bucket was a familiar, if entirely ignored, metronome in the labyrinthine corridors of the Pentagon. At 74 years old, Arthur was a ghost in faded blue coveralls. His right leg dragged slightly, a permanent, agonizing limp that he masked with a stoic, quiet dignity. To the thousands of analysts, strategists, and high-ranking officers who hurried past him every day, Arthur was just part of the architecture. He was the man who emptied the classified shred bins, polished the brass door handles until they gleamed, and buffed the linoleum floors of the E-ring, where the Department of Defense's most elite brass operated. But Arthur was also the favorite target of Bradley Hayes. Bradley was 32, a GS-14 Deputy Director of Strategic Analysis, and a man who fought his wars entirely through PowerPoint presentations and aggressive emails. He wore custom-tailored suits, slicked his hair back with expensive pomade, and possessed an arrogance that could only be cultivated by a man who had never faced real physical danger. Accompanying him like a loyal lapdog was Captain Thomas Fletcher, a junior aide-de-camp who mistook proximity to power for actual authority. Watch the shoes stumbles. Bradley snapped one Tuesday morning, deliberately stepping onto the patch of floor Arthur had just laid a coat of wax on. The rubber sole of Bradley's Italian loafer left a stark, ugly scuff mark across the pristine surface. Arthur paused, his gnarled hands gripping the wooden handle of his mop. His knuckles were thick, scarred white over the joints. "I just waxed that section, Mr. Hayes. It needs 5 minutes to dry." Bradley stopped turning slowly. He exchanged a smirk with Captain Fletcher. "Are you giving me orders, Arthur? Because I'm pretty sure my security clearance is about 14 levels higher than your pay grade. I walk where I need to walk. You clean it up. That's the food chain." Captain Fletcher chuckled, sipping from a cardboard coffee cup. Maybe if he didn't drag that dead leg around, he could clean it fast enough before people had to walk on it. Arthur didn't say a word. He didn't tighten his jaw. He didn't glare. He simply looked at the scuff mark, nodded slowly, and lowered his mop back into the bucket of chemical-smelling water. "Yes, sir. I'll get right on it." "Make sure you do." Bradley sneered intentionally, dropping his crumpled coffee receipt onto the wet floor before walking away, his laughter echoing down the corridor. What Bradley Hayes didn't know, what no one in that building knew, save for a few heavily redacted files buried in the National Archives, was that Arthur Pendleton had not always carried a mop. 55 years ago, Arthur had carried an M60 machine gun through the suffocating, blood-soaked jungles of the A Shau Valley. Arthur was a survivor of MACVSOG, the highly classified Covert Special Operations Unit that ran black operations during the Vietnam War. He had spent his youth dropping behind enemy lines, outnumbered 50-1, hunting nightmares in the dark. The limp wasn't from arthritis. It was the lingering souvenir of a 7.62mm AK-47 round he took to the shattered femur while dragging 2 wounded men to an extraction chopper under heavy mortar fire. He had never spoken of it. When the war ended, the government had quietly pinned a Navy cross to his chest in a closed-door ceremony, sworn him to secrecy regarding the classified mission, and sent him back into the civilian world. He took the janitorial job at the Pentagon to pay off the crushing medical debts left behind by his late wife's battle with cancer. He needed the health insurance, and he needed the quiet routine. He didn't mind the hard work. He had endured far worse than a few scuff marks and the petty insults of soft men in expensive suits. Discipline was baked into his marrow. You endure. You complete the mission. You do not break. But the bullying was escalating. Bradley Hayes had recently been passed over for a promotion, and his bruised ego needed an outlet. Arthur became his personal punching bag. It started with small things. Bradley would deliberately kick over Arthur's wet floor signs. He would wait until Arthur had finished cleaning the men's room mirrors, only to immediately splash water all over them. "Keeps you employed, old man," he would say. Then it became cruel. One afternoon, Arthur was struggling to lift a heavy bag of shredded documents into the incinerator chute. His bad leg buckled slightly, and the bag slipped from his grasp, spilling thousands of paper strips across the floor. Bradley and Fletcher were walking by. Instead of helping, Bradley pulled out his smartphone. "Look at this," Bradley mocked, filming Arthur, as the old man painfully lowered himself to his knees to gather the shreds. "Taxpayer dollars at work. We can fund a $2 trillion fighter jet program, but we can't afford a janitor who can stand on 2 feet. Arthur's supervisor, a nervous, perpetually sweating man named Greg, saw the incident, but darted into an adjacent office. Greg was terrified of the civilian analysts and their political connections. Later in the basement break room next to the roaring boiler, Greg handed Arthur a write-up. "I'm sorry, Artie," Greg muttered, refusing to make eye contact. "Mr. Hayes filed a formal complaint, said you were creating a fire hazard and loitering in a secure corridor. I have to put this in your file. One more and, well, the contracting company will terminate you." Arthur looked at the piece of paper. He thought about his wife's medical bills, the final payment, still 2 years away. He folded the paper meticulously and slipped it into his pocket. "I understand, Greg. It won't happen again." Alone in the dim light of the basement, Arthur reached into his wallet. He pulled out a worn, frayed photograph wrapped in plastic. It was a picture of 6 young men, their faces painted in camouflage grease, standing in front of a UH-1 Huey helicopter. Arthur traced his thumb over the faces of the 5 men who hadn't come home. "Just a little longer, boys," Arthur whispered to the photograph. "Just got to hold the line a little longer." The atmosphere in the Pentagon shifted dramatically the following Thursday. The air hummed with a frantic electric tension. A massive joint strategic summit was taking place in Room 3, E2551, of the most secure briefing rooms in the building. Intelligence directors, high-ranking politicians, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were converging to discuss a rapidly deteriorating geopolitical crisis in Eastern Europe. The guest of honor, and the man everyone was terrified of, was General Darian Bulldog Hamilton. General Hamilton was a legendary figure. A 4-star general of the United States Marine Corps, he was currently serving as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was a man carved from granite, known for his uncompromising standards, his brilliant tactical mind, and his absolute intolerance for bureaucratic nonsense. Rumor had it, the president was grooming him to be the next Secretary of Defense. When General Hamilton walked into a room, generals checked their posture, and politicians stopped talking. Bradley Hayes was in a state of near panic. He was slated to deliver a 10-minute intelligence briefing to General Hamilton's team. It was his chance to get noticed to secure the promotion he felt he had been unfairly denied. He had been drinking espresso since 4 a.m., pacing the corridors, barking orders at his subordinates, and ensuring every single detail in the E-ring hallway leading to the briefing room was absolutely flawless. At 8:15 a.m., 45 minutes before the general was scheduled to arrive, Bradley stormed out of his office, holding a massive stack of manila folders and a venti iced latte. He was sweating profusely. Down the hall, Arthur was quietly running a dust mop along the baseboards. He had been ordered to ensure the corridor was spotless. He was moving as fast as his damaged leg would allow, the dull ache radiating from his knee all the way up to his hip. "Arthur." Bradley's voice cracked like a whip down the long, empty corridor. Arthur stopped, turning slowly. "Yes, Mr. Hayes." Bradley marched up to him, his face flushed. "What is this?" he demanded, pointing to a microscopic speck of dirt near the heavy oak doors of the briefing room. "Are you blind? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is walking down this exact hallway in less than an hour, and this place looks like a Greyhound bus station." "I am working my way down the hall, sir," Arthur said calmly. "I will have it cleared in 2 minutes." "You'll clear it now," Bradley shouted. In his frantic, over-caffeinated state, Bradley gestured wildly with his hands. The plastic lid of his iced latte popped off. A tidal wave of sticky brown liquid splashed across the polished linoleum, splattering all over the baseboards, the oak doors and the cuffs of Arthur's blue coveralls. The ice cubes skittered across the floor like scattered diamonds. Silence descended on the corridor. Captain Fletcher, who had just stepped out of an adjacent office, froze. A few other analysts peeked their heads out of their doors, drawn by the yelling. Bradley looked at the massive puddle, then looked at Arthur. A vein throbbed in Bradley's temple. Instead of apologizing, his panic morphed into vicious defensive rage. "Look what you made me do," Bradley hissed, stepping back to avoid getting his shoes sticky. "You were in my way. You clumsy old fool, you tripped me." "I was standing still, sir," Arthur replied quietly, looking down at the puddle of coffee seeping into his boots. "Don't you talk back to me," Bradley roared, pointing a trembling finger at Arthur's chest. "General Hamilton is going to be here any minute. If he sees this mess, it reflects on my department. Get on your knees and clean this up right now. I want this floor shining so bright I can see my reflection in it. Or I swear to God, Arthur, I will have your security badge revoked before lunch." Greg, the facility manager, rushed out of a side hallway, his eyes wide with horror at the scene. "Mr. Hayes, please, I can send a cleaning crew." "No," Bradley snapped. "He made the mess by being in the way. He cleans it, hand wipes it. Now." Arthur looked at Greg. He saw the sheer terror in his manager's eyes. He knew that if he fought back, Greg would be fired right alongside him. Arthur closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He took a slow, deep breath, burying the warrior's pride deep down in the dark place where he kept his ghosts. "I'll clean it," Arthur said. Slowly, agonizingly, Arthur lowered himself to the floor. His bad knee hit the hard linoleum, sending a sharp spike of white-hot pain shooting up his spine. He pulled a rag from his back pocket and began to wipe up the spilled coffee by hand, working his way across the wet floor, while Bradley stood over him, hands on his hips, breathing heavily. "Faster?" Bradley muttered, checking his gold watch. "Unbelievable. You people are utterly useless." Captain Fletcher leaned against the wall, shaking his head. "Careful, Brad. Don't let him get any on your trousers." Arthur scrubbed the floor in silence. The physical pain in his leg was blinding, but his hands moved with steady mechanical precision. He wrung the rag out into a small bucket, wiping away the dark liquid, erasing the stain. Just complete the mission, he told himself. Complete the mission. Go home. "Listen up," Bradley said loudly, addressing the small crowd of junior staffers who had gathered to watch the spectacle. "This is what happens when people lack accountability. Remember this when you're preparing your briefs. Precision matters. Excellence matters. We don't tolerate dead weight in this department." Suddenly, the heavy security doors at the far end of the corridor, the entrance to the E-ring secured perimeter, buzzed loudly and swung open with a heavy clack. The hallway instantly fell dead silent. A wall of large men in tailored dark suits, Secret Service and Pentagon Force protection, stepped through the doors, fanning out rapidly to secure the corridor. Behind them came a phalanx of high-ranking military aides carrying briefcases and secure tablets. And then, stepping through the center of the formation, was General Darian Bulldog Hamilton. He was an imposing figure, broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed in his Marine Corps dress uniform, 4 silver stars gleaming on his shoulders, rows of colorful ribbons expanding across his chest like a tapestry of modern warfare. His face was a mask of stern, uncompromising focus. Bradley Hayes instantly straightened up his face, draining of color. He hastily smoothed his tie and plastered on a bright, eager smile, completely forgetting about the old janitor still kneeling in a puddle of coffee at his feet. "Attention on deck," Captain Fletcher barked out instinctively. Every officer in the hallway snapped to rigid attention. The civilian analysts pressed themselves against the walls, standing perfectly still. General Hamilton marched down the corridor, his heavy leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the linoleum. He was flanked by a 2-star general and a civilian intelligence director, listening intently as they whispered last-minute details into his ear. He didn't look left or right. He was a man walking to war. Bradley stepped forward slightly, clearing his throat, ready to intercept the general and offer a glowing welcome. "General Hamilton, sir, on behalf of the Strategic Analysis Division." But General Hamilton didn't hear him. The 4-star general had stopped mid-stride. The sudden halt caused his entire entourage to freeze in confusion. The 2-star general beside him nearly bumped into his shoulder. General Hamilton wasn't looking at Bradley Hayes. He wasn't looking at the briefing room doors. His eyes were fixed on the floor. He was staring down at the old limping janitor in the faded blue coveralls who was currently pushing himself up from his bad knee, a coffee-soaked rag clutched in his scarred hands. Arthur stood up. He wiped his hands on his pants. He looked up, and his tired grey eyes met the piercing, hardened gaze of the 4-star general. For 3 agonizingly long seconds, the most powerful corridor in the world was completely devoid of sound. No one breathed. Bradley Hayes looked wildly between the general and the janitor, his confident smile melting into a mask of pure confusion. Then General Hamilton did something that made the collective heart of the E-ring stop beating. General Darian Bulldog Hamilton, a man who had stared down warlords in Afghanistan and commanded hundreds of thousands of troops across the globe, broke from his security detail. He stepped directly into the puddle of spilled coffee, ruining the mirror shine of his Corfam dress shoes. He didn't even blink. He walked until he was mere inches from the old man in the blue coveralls. Bradley Hayes, completely misreading the situation, thought the general was disgusted by the mess. His ambition kicked into overdrive, desperate to salvage the moment. "General Hamilton, sir, I sincerely apologize for this profound embarrassment," Bradley stammered, stepping forward with his hands raised placatingly. "This contractor was carelessly blocking a secure thoroughfare and dropped his equipment. I was just ordering him to—" "Shut your mouth," General Hamilton said. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He delivered the 3 words with a terrifying absolute calm that dropped the temperature in the corridor by 10 degrees. It was a voice accustomed to calling in airstrikes. Bradley's jaw snapped shut with an audible click. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly, chalky white. General Hamilton turned his attention back to the janitor. He looked at the scarred hands, the slight lean to favor the bad right leg, and the faded, tired eyes that still held an unmistakable, unyielding steel. The general's chest rose and fell in a slow, deep breath. "Staff Sergeant Pendleton." General Hamilton asked, his voice suddenly cracking with an emotion no one in the Pentagon had ever heard from him before. Arthur stood perfectly still. The mop bucket and the coffee rag seemed to vanish from the reality of the moment. He looked at the 4 stars on the general's shoulders, then up to the man's face. Slowly, the corner of Arthur's mouth twitched into a small, wistful smile. "It's been a long time, General." Arthur's voice was like grinding gravel. "Though if my memory serves me right, the last time I saw you, you were 12 years old, stealing the hubcaps off my Chevy Nova in your old man's driveway in Coronado." A collective gasp echoed down the E-ring hallway. The two-star general behind Hamilton looked like he was going to pass out. Secret Service agents exchanged bewildered glances. General Hamilton didn't discipline the janitor for the disrespect. Instead, the fearsome bulldog of the Marine Corps closed his eyes, and a single silent tear tracked down his weathered cheek. "My father told me you died in 72, Arthur Hamilton whispered. "He spent the last 30 years of his life trying to find your gravesite so he could leave his silver star on it." "The government thought it was best if I didn't exist anymore, Davy," Arthur replied softly, using the general's childhood nickname. "Black operations. You know how the suits in this building work. I got ghosted. It was the only way to keep the people I cared about safe." For the junior analysts and aides watching the pieces were suddenly violently falling into place. 54 years ago, General Hamilton's father, Colonel Richard Hamilton, had been a young infantry commander, trapped behind enemy lines in the Ashar Valley. His platoon had been decimated, pinned down by a battalion of NVA regulars. The Pentagon had written them off as a total loss. No extraction was possible. But a 6-man MACVSOG reconnaissance team operating illegally in the sector heard the desperate radio calls. They didn't ask for permission. They breached the NVA perimeter in the dead of night. 5 of those covert operators were killed, tearing a hole through the enemy lines. The sole survivor, a staff sergeant, had carried a critically wounded Richard Hamilton on his back for 6 miles through a monsoon, fighting off tracking dogs and sniper fire, taking a bullet to the femur in the process. That staff sergeant was Arthur Pendleton. General Hamilton took a step back. He squared his shoulders, his back popping perfectly straight. He brought his right hand up the fingertips, striking the brim of his cover in a razor-sharp, flawless military salute. "It is the honor of my lifetime to finally say thank you, Staff Sergeant." General Hamilton boomed his voice, echoing off the walls. In the United States military, the protocol is absolute. The lower rank always salutes the higher rank first. But here, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was holding a rigid salute for a civilian janitor in stained coveralls. Arthur looked at the general. He didn't reach for his mop. He didn't look like a broken old man anymore. The stoop vanished from his spine. He drew himself up, bringing his own scarred hand to his forehead, returning the salute with the crisp, muscular muscle memory of an elite warrior. For 10 seconds, the 2 men stood locked in a tribute that spanned a half-century of blood sacrifice and silent duty. When General Hamilton finally dropped his arm, the air in the hallway felt supercharged. The emotional reunion was over. The bulldog was back, and he had unfinished business. The general slowly turned his head to look at the puddle of coffee, the dirty rag in Arthur's hand, and then finally his gaze locked onto Bradley Hayes. Bradley was trembling, literal visible shaking. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. "Mr. Hayes, is it?" General Hamilton asked, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen. Yes, General. "Bradley Hayes, Deputy Director of—" "I don't care what your title is," Hamilton interrupted. "I want to know why a recipient of the Navy Cross was kneeling in a puddle of iced coffee outside my briefing room." Bradley swallowed hard, sweat dripping from his pomaded hair into his eyes. "Sir, it was an accident. He knocked into me. I was simply instructing him on proper protocol." "He's lying," the voice came from the back of the crowd. It was Greg, the nervous, perpetually sweating facility manager. He stepped forward, pushing past Captain Fletcher. Greg's hands were shaking, but his jaw was set. He had watched Arthur take the abuse for months, and seeing the four-star general salute his employee had finally snapped the chains of his own cowardice. "Greg, shut up," Bradley hissed under his breath. "No, I won't," Greg said loudly, looking directly at General Hamilton. "Mr. Hayes threw his coffee on the floor on purpose, General. He ordered Arthur to clean it up on his hands and knees. He bullies him every single day. He threatened to have Arthur's security badge revoked if he didn't do it." General Hamilton's eyes darkened into a storm front. He looked at Captain Fletcher, who immediately averted his gaze, confirming the facility manager's story. The general took 2 slow steps toward Bradley Hayes. He didn't shout. The quiet was infinitely worse. "The fundamental requirement of leadership, Mr. Hayes, is the protection of those under your charge," General Hamilton said, leaning in so close that Bradley had to press his back against the oak doors. "A man who uses his institutional power to humiliate a subordinate is a coward, and a coward has no place in the defense of this nation." "General, please, my father is senator." "I don't care if your father is God Almighty," Hamilton whispered viciously. "You are a disgrace to the air you breathe. You are unfit to hold a security clearance, and you are entirely unfit to walk the halls of this building." General Hamilton turned to the 2-star general beside him. "General Miller, revoke Mr. Hayes's top-secret clearance, effective this exact second. Without clearance, he cannot hold his position. Have Pentagon force protection escort him to the perimeter. I want his desk boxed up and left on the sidewalk in the rain." "Yes, Chairman," General Miller barked, immediately signaling to the large security officers flanking the corridor. "Wait, you can't do this. I have a briefing. I have rights." Bradley shrieked his voice, pitching into an undignified squeal as 2 massive Pentagon police officers grabbed him by the biceps. "Your briefing is cancelled. You are dismissed, son," Hamilton said, turning his back on the man. Bradley Hayes, the arrogant terror of the E-Ring, was dragged kicking and protesting down the hallway, his custom Italian loafers scuffing the very floor he had obsessed over, until the heavy security doors buzzed shut, cutting off his cries. Captain Fletcher, realizing his own career was now radioactive by association, quietly slipped away down a side stairwell. General Hamilton turned back to Arthur, his expression softening instantly. "Arthur, why are you pushing a mop?" the general asked gently. "A man with your record, you should be living comfortably. You should be taken care of." Arthur sighed, the adrenaline fading, leaving him tired. "My wife Martha passed away a few years back. The treatments were expensive. The VA covered some, but not all of it. I'm just paying off the debts, Davy. A man honors his debts." General Hamilton nodded slowly, a profound respect etching into his features. "Yes, he does. But this country owes you a debt that dwarfs whatever medical bills you have, and it's time we paid up." The general pulled a gold pen from his pocket and scribbled a number on the back of a business card. He handed it to Arthur. "My personal cell," Hamilton said. "Go home, Arthur. Your shift is over. Forever. By tomorrow morning, I will have the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Secretary of Defense on the phone. Your debts are wiped clean, courtesy of a grateful nation, and we're upgrading your retirement to a full officer's pension with retroactive back pay for 50 years. Arthur looked at the card, his vision blurring slightly. He had fought his war in the shadows, expecting nothing but the cold dirt of a forgotten jungle. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Davy, General, you don't have to do that. It's not a request, Staff Sergeant." General Hamilton smiled warmly. "It's a direct order from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs." General Hamilton stepped back and snapped another perfect salute. This time, every single officer aide and civilian in the hallway immediately followed suit. The corridor became a silent sea of rigid, honorable salutes, all directed at the old man with the mop. Arthur stood tall. He returned the salute one last time. He left the mop bucket right where it was turned around and walked down the E-ring corridor. For the first time in a long time, the pain in his leg didn't seem to bother him at all. Sometimes the quietest people carry the heaviest armor, and true heroes don't wear capes. They wear faded coveralls and carry the scars of silent sacrifice. Bullying is a coward's game, and karma always collects its debts. If this incredible story of honor and justice moved you, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and hit subscribe for more amazing true-to-life stories.